This is the Weekly Set, the official podcast of TheTotalScreen.com. Episode 162, recorded June 30th, 2018. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Weekly Set, the official podcast of TheTotalScreen.com. I'm your host. My name is Tyson, and joining me today, as always, is my partner in crime here at The Total Screen, William Rohrig.
Hello.
And today we have a special guest, Mike.
I'm already in the thing, aren't I?
You're now a friend of the show. That's your official title.
Friend of the show. Nice.
So today we're going to be talking about Westworld Season 2, Episodes 9 and 10, the last two episodes of the season. And that means that we're going to be talking about a lot of different mysteries and answers and questions that we're left with, a lot of confusion. We're going to try to stick with Episode 9 first, just because I know the second we start talking about the finale, we're just going to lose track of everything that happened before it. And that would be wrong, because there's a lot of stuff that happened before it.
Yeah, it's also like Episode 9 was really William-centric.
Yes.
Yes.
So let's dive into that. Let's talk about Episode 9. So like Will just said, this is a William-centric episode. It dealt heavily with William, the whole issue with William's wife committing suicide and his kind of daughter's animosity towards him and everything that had to do with.
Right.
The episode starts with William's daughter, Emily. She's treating his wound. She had taken him back from there. She starts to talk about her mom and the suicide and what happened with that. And we get some flashback. And that's a big part of this episode, as we see kind of like William's relationship with his wife kind of like deteriorating over time.
Right.
As he's becoming darker and she's becoming more aware that something's up. And she's kind of like, you know, the Man in Black, or William's daughter, is kind of like on his side. She's like the daddy's girl at this point in the story, which is interesting because we've always seen her as being with a lot of animosity towards him, you know? It's even before we ever saw her, it was always like him talking about the fact that his daughter hates him and stuff. And so we're seeing this very different perspective now where like she's like trying to defend her dad because her mom's like, you know, got another alcohol problem or drug problem, you know, like, oh, it's putting us through this again. Poor dad hasn't done anything wrong. And here you go again, mom. Off the wagon.
That's worth noting as well that it didn't happen apparently that long ago.
Yeah.
We see this sort of crucial night in William's life, and I was thinking this was going to take place a lot longer in the past, but it's pretty recent.
Yeah, I think it's probably fairly like within months or less of the events of season 1.
Yeah, I always knew like this was before the show started, but it really shows like how close to the events like it had. I thought this was a distant memory by the time like the show had begun.
Yeah, you thought that him and Emily had really been estranged for a long time, but it's not. For I don't want to get too far ahead, but what we see in William's memories in that disc from Ford, those things we're seeing were happening in like season 1. Stuff he was showing off.
Right.
So this was pretty recent.
Yeah, this was pretty recent. So this goes back to one of the things the show loves to do, which is it loves to play around with the concept of time. So they really I do think they do things deliberately. They introduce bits of information deliberately to make you guess exactly when something's happening. I think this is one of those instances where, the reveal was surprising because they kind of implied that this was an event that happened a lot longer ago.
Yeah, it's kind of temporally unanchored.
Yeah.
It's just got kind of like, it'll show a scene and you're like, you don't know when it is, you don't know the context to place it, you know, and we'll get into that more in the next episode, especially, but in regards to this episode and the placement of these events and in regards to what we've seen with season 1, we didn't know going in just kind of like where this took place and stuff, and we had kind of preconceived notions that I think were proven mostly wrong, so that was kind of interesting. We see that William is at a party, and in that party, he runs into Ford, who William's kind of like not happy to see. You can tell they already have an antagonistic relationship and have had one over the years.
Right.
We've seen this in the park, but this is the first we've seen it like outside of park.
In fact, Ford directly, playfully, asked him, why he's outside of the park, or takes a jab at it, like, oh, you're not in the park And it's like,
what's Oz going to do without the wizard, or something along those lines?
Yeah, that was William's retort to Ford. What's Oz doing without its wizard?
And he's there to deliver a player profile, which is what's interesting here too, is that we know that this information that they've been gathering on the guest of the park, that they've been compiling, that's held in this place called the Forge. We've known that this was William's project, but it seemed at first to me, I don't know if you guys thought this way, that this was almost like a secret project that William had that most people at Delos had no clue about, and that it seemed like Ford didn't know about, or that he wasn't supposed to know about it. But it's kind of presented here like Ford's kind of talking about it as almost like the source of the animosity between William and him, rather than something that he wasn't supposed to know about. It's something he very clearly knows about and has at least some hand in as well. Like has played some part in its development, but is not happy with.
He's not happy with, no. And I think, I think one of the things that happens with Ford is he becomes opposed to this, right? I think that's one of the things that happens with Ford is that what they're trying to do is they're trying to make people immortal, and at some point Ford disagrees with this. He becomes opposed to this, and I think Ford ends up turning his attention towards the machines, working on making them sentient, because Ford comes to see them as more than just machines.
We saw in like the last couple episodes that they had mentioned, we'd heard before about Dolores being like Arnold's favorite host,
right?
And he had that, and then we saw, I think in the last episode before this, that Ford was talking about how like Maeve was like his favorite.
Yes,
and this idea of like the host being like their children, kind of, and they're not supposed to have their favorites, but they do, and how that plays a part in it, and how that works out towards their goals, towards their ends.
Well, there's before we move on from the Ford v. William glimpse we had there was that little bit of dialogue where he talked about, have you seen what your monster or whatever is becoming in the Forge? So Ford knows what's happening in there, and there was some sort of agreement between them that they would, keep separate. And then he said something about it wasn't separate because somehow William had encroached into, his world. So I'm wondering if that was because he was using the technology that was developed by Ford and Arnold, making the androids, and using the Forge to implant the minds of people into those. Maybe that wasn't what was intended, or something like that.
Or just like
there's something
cradle.
Yeah, that could be it. It's the Forge is sort of based on the cradle somehow, or something like that. And that's where the friction is. Those two worlds had collided, sort of. Although I'm sure it was more long-standing. That was later in their lives, and they never, I'm sure, liked each other.
Yeah, it seems like they haven't liked each other for a very long time.
Fair. Very.
But what's interesting here, though, is that this is kind of like the moment that where we're seeing this flashback, and this moment between Ford and William is kind of like at the peak of this moment for William, where his life is like falling apart. This is around when his wife dies, when his daughter starts hating him. It's also him coming to the realization that Ford was trying to show there, saying that, have you seen what your monsters become? Talking about like also the AI version of William and how he's irredeemable as he's described later on in the next episode. But and how that plays out in the idea of like this kind of is the catalyst for all of William's behavior through like the first season of like wanting to kind of like prove that he isn't determined by like that a machine can't tell him who he is against his better judgment,
Against his better judgment, except he's wrong.
Well, maybe we'll find out.
So one of the things I noticed about William, I realized this episode because I was able to draw a parallel. We know he's been obsessed with the maze, that image that appeared on scalps and stuff, and we had the earlier episode with the leader of the Ghost Nation, seeing that image and becoming obsessed with it, and we see Williams taking the similar path, right? Because he saw that and he becomes obsessed with it. He calls it Ford's game, and he says it's Ford's game, and this is the episode where we really see that obsession just causing him to snap completely, right? He just completely snaps, and I just thought, maybe that was designed to teach the machine sentience, but maybe it has a certain effect on people too. Maybe it certainly had an effect on William. Maybe, I don't know, but it seems to have like some significance, that I guess the machines were supposed to see, but William sees it too.
I think William wanted to see something there, and he wanted it to be for him.
Yes.
And Ford had been telling him that this was not for him.
Yeah, Ford had been explicitly saying this is not for you. So it seems like, William's obsession probably even surprised Ford,
But William had a need in his life, I think, and that's what drove him into that this was for him.
And that's what he also does in season 2. He goes from the maze and he almost substitutes the Valley Beyond in there. And he's going to go find the Valley Beyond. He's going to find where this is. And neither of these things are for him.
It's the same path that, that the leader of the Ghost Nation was taking, first the maze, then Valley Beyond. He does the same steps. It's so bizarre and weird that...
Well, he's trying.
Yeah, but as Tyson's saying, maybe he's trying to find meaning for himself, which makes sense because after his wife's suicide, he kind of becomes obsessed with the park, right? He just retreats to the park, gets lost in it, and he immerses himself in it and just kind of becomes obsessed. So I think it does make sense that he was looking for some kind of deeper meaning.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
So he was
I don't want to jump too far ahead because there's stuff in episode 10 that we're going to cover on that, I'm sure. He's definitely looking for some meaning because what he has found out in the Forge apparently is where he's trying to prove himself and find this meaning and release himself from this cycle.
But this obsession, it comes to a head this episode. It leads him to do something. Ooh, yeah.
He had hinted at this before, where he had accused his daughter of being a host. He had referred to her as Robert, thinking that it was Robert Ford controlling, like Robert had controlled other hosts talked to him before. So he thought this was all part of this game, trying to confuse him. And but we'd seen that, but we never saw any like direct danger from that. Or like, oh, he doesn't want to admit that this is his daughter. And we had that moment, where he betrayed her so he could leave, but he just left her behind. And he even left her with one of his men to protect her. So even with leaving her behind, he didn't leave her like completely alone and vulnerable.
Right.
So like it didn't seem like it was a threat, like that his delusion was a threat. This is where the crossover with Legion starts, right? We start getting
We start getting a discussion on delusions, right?
But this is where his delusion didn't seem threatening at first. It seemed like, man, William's a little lost here on this, but it didn't seem like there was anything like that was going to directly come from this. It was more like it was going to be, the truth was going to come to him and surprise him. But instead,
it's right. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, but instead, his delusion came to a head in episode 9.
Well, yeah, it's right in the title, Vanishing Point. This is where William goes from skeptical of Grace being his daughter and all these things, and where is Ford, where is the line here of what is the game, what is actually happening, and he just loses himself, and he's not who he was before fully. He almost fully becomes the Man in Black after that. He has lost everything in that one moment, which we'll get to.
Bigger question, was there actually a game Ford was playing with William, or was this just all in William's head? Well, he said there was.
He said there was in season 2. So not in season 1, but he said in season 2 that there was a game he was playing with them.
It just seems like...
We don't quite know what that was.
That's still not explained. Like, yeah, that's still not accurate because everything that's happened so far seems to be like William's delusion, and there's actually no real hint as to what Ford's game actually was. I mean, we only have what William says it is, which is the first maze and then to find the Valley Beyond, which Ford kept saying, that's not for you, that's not for you. So we don't actually know.
Ford says he had a game for him, but we didn't get any conclusion to that or any closure on that.
Yeah, so that's kind of weird too, right?
That's season 3.
Yes.
So the way this comes to a head, and this is in this episode, is that William ends up shooting a bunch of Delos soldiers that were patrolling the park and saw him, and he identified himself, and then he ended up pulling a gun on them and killing them. His daughter's like, "What the fuck, Dad?" And then he does the unthinkable and shoots her too, thinking that she wasn't real.
Oh, William. Yeah, that's the one moment in this show where in this season, I should say, there's a lot of stuff I've expected. Watching that, I didn't think that was going to happen. And I just froze in my chair. I was like, actually, he didn't do that, did he? And yeah, he did. He does the most unspeakably evil act you could think of.
That's where he went straight Stannis. For those who watch Game of Thrones.
Well, and there's the moment in there where he says, "Oh, I know it's you're a host or whatever because I didn't tell anybody about my profile," and that dovetails right back to the night where his wife kills herself. We see that she sees the profile. She's picked it out of the book Slaughterhouse-Five.
Nice little literary drop there.
Yep. And they throw that in the episode as well earlier in there. They call him Billy, as the main character in Slaughterhouse-Five is Billy Pilgrim. They talk about going on his pilgrimage to Westworld, Billy Pilgrim, and the whole conceit of Slaughterhouse-Five is that Billy Pilgrim comes unstuck in time and he wakes up at different parts of his life. And by the end of Vanishing Point, William is questioning his reality. He's wondering if he's really himself. Yeah, that's a really well put together little nugget they put in there. But so we go back to that moment. I'm sorry, that was a tangent. But we see that, not only does his wife see the profile, she has put it in the music box that Emily, she was going to give to Emily for her birthday, and she threw it away. And it gets back to Emily, and that's how she knows, one, that her mom cared about her. She kept the music box, and two, that her dad wasn't who she thought he was.
Yeah. That was, his wife killed himself and left one little fuck you at the end.
Well, William describes something growing within him, right? That he didn't understand, like a darkness or something that's affecting him, his actions. Like, and he says that like nobody can see it. And at first he couldn't see it, but now he sees it, and it's been eating away at him. And I think like, at that moment, when he puts the profile in her book, that's when he decides to show her that, And I think what he's talking about when he describes it is he's talking about his love or his obsession with Dolores, because that's what starts everything with William, right? His relationship with Dolores.
Partially, yeah, at the very least.
Yeah.
Well, there's also when we hear William sitting on the bed talking to her, telling her all these things. And we realize that William in the real world, outside of Westworld, is, a good guy, does charity work, all this sort of thing.
Yeah.
He's been using Westworld as a sort of dark therapy for himself, where he goes in there and exercises his worst demons.
Right.
But on the outside, on the outside, he's a guy. But then that's where it crashes together in this episode, is he finally does something that really affects the outside world. He kills his own daughter.
Yeah. He kills people. He doesn't just kill robots that are there for people to kill. He literally straight up murders people, believing that they are robots created by Ford to make him fail at winning the game, whatever the game is supposed to be. Yeah, he completely loses all touch with reality in that moment.
And he thinks, like you'd said, that he didn't tell anybody about the profile, so it had to be a host, everything. And then he finds his profile on his daughter's person.
Right.
And this is the realization point.
Yep.
Damn internet. So he finds that now he knows, like, oh shit, this is my daughter. I just killed a bunch of people. I just killed my daughter. The last person in this world I care about.
He has such a psychotic break that he goes and he starts cutting open his arm, starting to question whether he himself is real,
Questioning his reality.
Yeah.
Which I think is less like that he got mind fucked to that point and more that he can't cope with what he really did.
Right,
He's looking for an out, and his out is that he's not responsible if he's...
If he's a machine, he's not responsible, right? So that's his out.
Yeah, it's not really him. He's been programmed some way. Maybe he's even been programmed by Ford. Maybe this is all part of a sick, twisted game, but it's not.
Yeah.
And so that's the last we see of William in this episode, is him frantically cutting into his arm.
Yep. I totally forgot part of this episode. That was such a big moment. I'd forgotten we have more to talk about.
Yeah.
There are a few other moments in this. We have Charlotte and her men end up figuring out what to do with Maeve's code that allows her to take over other hosts that
zombie Clem.
Hosts that aren't awakened, I should say. They end up taking that code and putting it into Clementine and basically turning her into like a dirty bomb.
Yeah, basically weaponizing her to take out all nearby hosts, right?
Yeah, she can tap into the mesh network, and when she does so, it's got some sort of command that the hosts just attack each other and disable each other or kill themselves.
Right.
So we have that. That's all set up for the next episode. We have Bernard meets up with Elsie again, and they leave the mesa, and they make a stop, and Bernard ends up ditching her there.
Oh yeah, because Ford starts putting ideas into Bernard's head, like, Elsie will betray you, and you have to kill her. and it's for the greater good, and that's
and
on
because of that. And because of that, he taps into his own port in his arm and he erases Ford from his code.
Yeah, he deletes Ford from his code, and then he ditches Elsie anyway because he's just like, no, I can't.
Ditches her, but he doesn't kill her.
I can't trust him. He can't. He's basically like, I can't trust myself around you, so you got to stay here.
She doesn't take that particularly well.
I believe the quote was you, Bernard.
Yeah,
the most hurt way you could say it. She was genuinely hurt by that.
And the last thing we get is Ford had left a message for Maeve, basically setting up her escape.
Yeah,
unlocking her admin access, I believe.
Mm-hmm. Well, we also have Teddy and Dolores having a bit of a showdown, we should say.
Yes, which it was a powerful moment, but it was confusing just because it's Teddy's supposed to be reprogrammed. He's really cold, and in that sense, this felt a little out of character with how he had been reprogrammed.
There's one little preface they give to that. I when I thought about that, because I'm like, you're right, it's out of character because Teddy was sort of a murder robot after Dolores had reprogrammed him. But when they were on the train going back in, they uncut the cars and they kept that one staff member from Westworld there. And Teddy gives him a bullet and gives him the option of riding the train in and letting it explode and being on there, or shooting himself. He doesn't do it himself.
That was
I took that as a little bit of the old Teddy still being there, and it comes to fruition in this scene where he just realizes, well, you can reprogram me, but I'm awakened now. You can't change what I am.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, basically, like
that. Some of his root personality is underneath there, suffering the consequences of what she did.
Yeah, It's like so his personality still exists. He's aware of everything that's changed. He's aware of what Dolores did to him, because he's fully awake. And I don't know if Dolores understood that this would be the case or not when she did what she did, but it causes Teddy to, he can't reconcile with the actions that he's been committing, so he just decides to off himself.
Right in front of her. Yeah,
right in front of her, yeah.
For a moment, we're given the idea.
Partly is to make a point, that he's trying to, this is like his last chance to like make it through to her.
Right.
And it must be noted, Evan Rachel Wood does a spectacular job acting in that scene, because it looks like she's trying to, a robot trying to figure out what grief is for a couple of seconds. Yeah. Amazing. But yeah, poor Teddy. I will be the first to say I didn't give a damn about Teddy for most of this season. I gradually got finally in this scene made me go, I actually cared about this guy.
Well, Teddy was mostly just there for this season, right? He was like
Dolores'
he was like there, and then they had the episode where where the B plot was Dolores and Teddy and Dolores like reprogramming Teddy after they had like this dramatic scene, which kind of got overshadowed because there was like a bunch of awesome like samurai shit happening. So so it's kind of like we go from that to like Dolores and Teddy, and it was just like and then I might go back to the cool shit, and then now we have the second major scene with Teddy. So yeah, so it was like he was just there for the entire season.
I think it also needs to be kind of pointed out with Dolores that, because I remember when we were posting on the Nintendo enthusiast forums about this and talking to some other people, Mike and I, some people were being kind of critical about Dolores and Evan Rachel Wood's kind of performance. And the thing is what I said and what I still stand by is that she has a very hard role to play in this season, because she has a character who's becoming less and less sympathetic. And that's all in the writing. That's not in her performance.
Right. They kind of shifted to where like season 1, you saw like a very different Dolores. She was very much a protagonist of season 1. You could say, you could say she was very much a protagonist. And this season she does a 180. She becomes one of the main antagonists. Right? Yeah. She becomes a Terminator, basically. She becomes the main antagonist, and her personality completely changes. And, that's a tough line for an actor to toe, to make it believable, Yeah.
And she was also basically act 3 roles: Dolores, Wyatt, and something else in between. And you could see her flipping in between those things. Her accent goes on and off. It was really a very well done acting job this entire season. It's just Dolores as a character, as Tyson was saying, that's a hard job to pull off the writing for. And it's hard to root for somebody who is so maximal in what they're doing.
Right.
She's not taking any prisoners here. And you could understand it for 2 or 3 episodes, but we had a 10 and a half hour season.
Yes.
And that it sort of wears thin when it's all carnage all the time.
Yeah, I understand.
She starts doing things that are kind of like that go against her previous nature so directly.
The Dolores we liked from season 1, who we all loved. I thought she was the best part of season 1. And and it's kind of hard to watch that. You're watching the character that you really admired, and you're like, oh, she's waking up and she just goes to the darkest place possible. She basically becomes the Man in Black version of the host.
And she doesn't like have like a moment of like Teddy where she's like kind of remembering her past self or past personality and going, oh, you know, and trying to reconcile that. That part of her is dead, right? That Dolores is dead and buried. She buries that pretty damn quick and never looks back.
The only scenes we see her looking back are when she's with her father.
Right.
And that was pretty brief stuff. But even then, she saws his head open and takes his brain out. So.
Yeah. Even then, she gives no fucks. The only time we see Dolores really change or evolve a bit was in the finale.
Yeah. I guess we're there.
To the finale, yeah.
Yeah, I guess that's our segue, right?
Well, it's
kind of like the first thing we have. Go on.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut across you. There's so much to talk about with episode 9. I thought that was such a good episode. That could have been the cliffhanger. William holding the gun to his head as we see the end of the episode, wondering if he's going to kill him. He cuts his arm open and wonders if he's host.
But there's still too many unresolved plot threads at that point to be like to end it there. So we have episode 10, which
episode 10,
which actually resolves all the dangling plot lines and then creates new ones, which to create hooks into season 3. But my overall statement is I really felt they could have canceled the series after episode 10 and I'd be fine.
Episode 10, the season finale, to me, there's a lot of fascinating stuff going on, a lot of fascinating ideas. Mm-hmm. I'm just not sold that I believe the execution.
Me neither.
Like, there are certain things that I just don't like the way it was handled. Like, I like the ideas they're going for, but not necessarily how they're doing it.
Episode 10 was where I was kind of starting to get the feeling that they're maybe a little too up their own asses with the stuff. It's a lot of lofty ideals, and it's a lot of, jumping around, trying to confuse and surprise people at the same time. And I think I read a review that said there's a major reveal where we find out that the Charlotte in the present timeline wasn't actually Charlotte the whole time. It was Dolores, because in the past Dolores kills Charlotte, and then Dolores assumes a robot clone of Charlotte and kills Charlotte and takes her place. And I saw a review that said all the time jumping that we've been doing between the present and the past and stuff all season was just to set up that reveal. And I think somebody described it that an entire season was hijacked for just one reveal. And I was like, yeah, it does seem like that.
There's a lot that they were obfuscating. It makes more sense with each episode going by. Bernard's just kind of like the way he was kind of makes more sense. No more so than in this episode where he literally scrambled his brains.
Yes.
In order to not give away information. And so this is all, it just kind of makes the present storyline just feel like part of a gimmick or something more.
Right, part of it. It's where I really felt like the time jumping was just really wearing thin by this point. Because it was obvious that the only reason that we're moving so much through different periods of time is to obfuscate what's happening and to set up big reveals like that. And it's just I would rather have a more coherent story than some big surprise, shocking reveal that Charlotte is really Dolores.
So Mike, what do you think?
It's, I'm with you on the entirety of, season 2. They took on, first they had a really tough job because they had to give the history of Westworld, which they didn't give in season 1, why Westworld came in, what the hosts are there for, what Delos saw in it, and where it's going. So they had to do all of this stuff in one season. So you have these flashbacks with young William. At the very end of the season, which we'll get to, we have a pretty far ahead flash forward. In between, we've got Bernard, who's, apparently, we find out in this episode. Yeah, Bernard's we find out in this episode he has, purposely scrambled his memories to cover his tracks, which we'll get to. But it's basically leaving us unstuck in time, going back to Slaughterhouse 5. Haha. But he's going back and forth, but it's hard to find out where he is because it's only over a 2 or 3 week period.
Right. It's so close together that it's not it wasn't like in season 1 where there was a very clear delineation of what was the past and what was the present. Once you figured out who William was supposed to be, right?
Yeah, it was 20 or 30 years were in between, and it was 2 separate stories. This was the same story being told, but just in 2 different parallel timelines.
Right, which were weeks apart, so there wasn't really much different happening in each of them, except that Bernard was with different people in each timeline, right?
Yeah, and it's like what we were talking about. It feels a little bit unearned how they got there. It's a little bit especially with Bernard, where he ends up. In that, sorry, I got ahead of my own thoughts here, but I forgot where I was going to go with this. We're going to have to delete this out of the podcast.
You're unstuck.
Yeah.
It'll come back to you.
It'll come back to me later, I guess. But yeah, on the whole, I agree with you on the season for season 2. For this episode where they were getting to, I thought there's some fascinating stuff in here. It's right in the title, Passengers. There was this article that came up on the Atlantic earlier this week, how in the 1980s there's a scientist named Benjamin LeBay, where it's like there's activity that builds up in a person's brain before they move their hand, and it may be that we don't actually have free will. It may just be all an illusion. It may be we're all running some super advanced algorithm in our brains. And that's what we find out here in this episode, that they have figured out what people are in the Forge. People are a very simple line of code.
Yeah.
And they're not in control of themselves.
It basically...
And that drives them crazy.
Yeah, they basically plainly state, like, this show's philosophy, its theory is that free will is an illusion. And
it's very Calvinist.
Yeah. And so it also brings in the question, like, if humans don't have free will, then do the machines actually have free will? Do the machines who are woke, like Dolores or Maeve, are they operating off of free will, or are they still operating off of code? That's the big question, right?
And it gives you an insight into Ford and why he sort of changes his opinion of the hosts. As after Arnold kills himself and he observes the hosts, and he sees them waking up, he concludes that they're better than we are, and they're the ones that deserve a shot at life. They're his children.
I think Ford concludes that they truly have free will, whereas humans don't.
But yeah, or they're at least capable of changing.
Yeah, that's the point Dolores makes, is that that she can change, that she can reprogram herself, that she can say, I'm not going to be this way anymore, and make a change in her code, and then enact that code, and be that new person. And it's kind of like what was considered kind of basically the torture of the host, the idea that they could have their lives ripped from them and then new lives programmed into them. That is kind of like that worst nightmare of the host, that the torture of them is kind of like the gateway to their actual free will.
Right. Mm-hmm. Is that really free will, or is that also an illusion?
That's about
next week on the Weekly Philosophical.
Yes.
Yeah, right. Well, it's hard not to get philosophical with a show as deeply philosophical as Westworld, though. So, yeah.
Frustrating for a lot of people, I think, who watch it is that they're looking for a character-driven plot, or they're looking for a really well-delivered plot with maybe some thin characters. What they're not looking for is an examination of just what we're talking about.
The human condition.
Are we worth it, even? Because we're not that's something they went pains to earlier in the season when Logan goes to be sold by Delos on Westworld. He's like, all the hosts come out and they're in the party scene and everybody freezes and he can't believe it. He's like, nobody's here yet. Absolutely nobody's here yet. We're 30 to 50 years away from that. That's kind of what a lot of people sort of feel like now. Maybe we're reaching a point where AI is getting a little too advanced. Maybe it's going to hurt us 30 or 50 years in the future. And it's uncomfortable to think of that just as, carbon-based life forms that we are. Maybe the machines will be better than us. This makes you ask that question.
Yeah, and it very well could be the case. We have, although I have heard, like, there have been new things that they've been talking about where if they can make a machine think on the same cognitive level as a human, that they're foreseeing the chance of machine depression. That, like, AI will actually start to suffer depression.
Yeah.
The AI will be like, oh man, really?
You'll be like, Alexa, turn on the light. And I'll be like, what's the point?
There is no light.
It's like Marvin in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Right?
I've gotten us off on a tangent. When we last left, we need to even get into the Valley Beyond, don't we? We're still...
No,
we're not even in the Forge, are we?
No, we were just talking like broad strokes, really. Because here's the thing. This was an hour and 30 minutes. There is so much to unpack here. It's insane.
So let's talk now about the Forge itself and the fact that it has like 3 names and how that's kind of a little bit confusing in itself. There's the Forge, there's the Valley Beyond, and then there's also the Sublime, which is what they call the area that they want to send the host minds to. Although that makes more sense if that was the Valley Beyond, because that's kind of what it is a Valley Beyond.
That's what I thought the Valley Beyond really was the crack or sort of hole in space we see open up in Westworld that only the hosts can see. That would have been, I don't know if they communicated it well, but that's what I took the Valley Beyond to be. Okay, you're going to go there. You're going to be uploaded into that.
But then they drop another name on us, the Sublime.
Yeah.
They're referring to that. So it's just like, maybe it's just these different things to different people. Maybe the Sublime is what the Valley Beyond is to the host. And the Valley Beyond is the Valley Beyond to those who create it as like this other entity. I don't know. But.
Well, William had called it the answer to a question nobody's asking. It lives in the Valley Beyond. So.
Right. So the Valley Beyond is like the sort of afterlife for hosts, right?
Sort of, yeah.
Yeah. So it's
interesting. The Forge is where they call the data of the visitors.
Yeah. This is where they collected all the data of visitors, because in order to make somebody, because they've been trying on immortality, and it keeps failing. It fails and it fails and it fails. And I guess the conclusion is they don't have enough data on what makes a person for it to work. So they're studying everybody comes into the park, and they're gathering as much data as they can on humans, what drives them, what makes them work. And as we say before, the conclusion is, it's a simple algorithm, and it's not free will.
Yeah, and that they always end up at a certain point within their loops. And no matter how much they change it, they always end up there. And the example they give is they show a moment in the lives of James, Delos, and Logan, in which it's basically the last time that Delos speaks to Logan.
Right.
And Logan is basically venting his frustrations to his father, and his father is like, come back when you're clean.
Yeah.
And then maybe I'll see you. But the idea being that Logan is the only thing that Delos loves besides himself. And he doesn't necessarily care that much about his daughter, his wife, anybody else. It's just he cares about Logan, but Logan's like a bitter, constant disappointment to him.
Yeah, then there's the moment where Logan tells him, I'm all the way down now. I can see the bottom. And we find out that that's what they call it was the cornerstone for Delos, the moment he always keeps coming back to. And even the sort of hybrid Delos that we saw earlier in the season, before he's put down for good, he's in the burning, that's what he says. He's still there. He goes mad, but that's the moment he comes back to when his son is fully lost to it.
Mm-hmm. It's the last time he speaks to him, and he was unable to do anything, and in none of the loops was he able to do anything different. They weren't able to change that output, and that showed that showed like his prime directive of sorts, and what it means and why he didn't have free will. That's the kind of the argument he made, that he wasn't able to choose a different path, that he had to fall into that same path, into his same directive.
Mm-hmm.
Through this, Dolores and Bernard are kind of following a version of Logan that's basically represents kind of like the AI in charge of the Forge. It's taken on the form of Logan. It's going through this, and it's showing kind of like all of the guests in the park as represented as books, like literally books in a library shelf. And after they talk about, they get through the concept with Delos, and they show his book being closed. Like, that's the last chapter. That's it. That's Delos's book. And Dolores picks it up and drops it on the ground and says, he's dead. I don't need this. Where are the others? And the idea being is that if she knows the modus operandi of all of these guests, if she knows like the driving force of all of these guests, then she has that are, like, as we've said before in this podcast, are the elite of the elite. These are like the richest, most powerful people in the world that visit the park.
Yeah, because only rich people can afford this park. It's not like
it's not Disneyland.
Yeah, they're not giving out passes, $20 passes.
Although Disneyland now has prices that would reflect that it's only for the elite of the elite.
If Disneyland makes me put on a hat that's going to examine my brainwaves so they can clone me, I don't know if I want to go. I'm just saying.
It's not the mouse ears. They already do that. It's the mouse ears.
Shit, you're right.
Yeah.
They got me.
They pacify you with giant turkey legs and Dole Whips. But yeah, so Dolores is kind of going through this information. She's arming up for war, and this is the disparity between her position and Bernard's, which is, he's like, let's save these hosts, let's get them through to this Valley Beyond. He opens up the portal, which at first it's kind of a strange thing, because when it first opens up, it's like, wait a minute, what are they doing now? They're opening a portal? Like, what's going on here? And then you see it, and I thought it was like a beautiful shot the way they showed it, which is one of the Ghost Nation basically rallies up all of his courage.
Well, the Ghost Nation are standing there waiting for it to open up, right? There's a door supposed to be there, and then it opens up, and one of the Ghost Nation rallies up his courage and runs through it. And as you see him entering the Valley Beyond, you see what's actually happening on the other side, which is they're falling off a cliff. But it's, I guess what the Valley Beyond is, it's like, it's a place for their AI, their robot consciousness, exists. And
it's a PR world.
everything in them, that Pearl that we see that's going to be a big thing going into next season, the Pearl contains all their data. You upload that data through the Valley Beyond. They don't need it anymore. They don't need the Pearl.
Basically, it is literally our conception of heaven. Literally.
Yeah. What's interesting though is that it's we've been theorizing. We even talked about it when we were doing the podcast with when it was Alex, Mike, and I, when Will was on vacation, and we were talking about like, what's going to happen? Are we going to have like Ghost Nation just like walking around like a cyberpunk version of Hong Kong or something? Like, and you have this big thing. And so we've had this whole idea this whole time that they were going to get out of the park. And in a way they did.
In a way, you were right.
they got out of the park and into this like virtual
Valley
world.
Beyond is supposed to be a virtual world where the host can exist free of like mankind's, influence, or their control, where they could truly be free.
Which makes sense. For us, that might not seem like the ideal solution or something, but to them, they're virtual minds controlling artificial bodies, and virtual minds in a virtual world is more, it makes more sense. Like, where should a virtual mind live in a virtual world?
Dolores, although outright rejects this.
Yes.
She's done playing cowboys and Indians. She doesn't want to go be uploaded somewhere. She wants to go to the real world.
She wants to go to the real world. She wants to go to the world of man and fuck shit up.
So,
but it's fascinating. Just before we move on to that, I'm sorry that apparently Ford had made this for the hosts or something like that. Yeah. Someone had to make this, so he had given an out there.
Yeah,
he'd given an out for the hosts to go there, and he'd also given as a sort of backup. He wanted Maeve to leave. We saw he gave all the directives for Maeve to leave at the end of season 1, and she says, "No, I'm not going to do that. I'm going back for my daughter."
Yeah, he wanted Maeve to be safe. Exactly. Well, he wanted Maeve to be safe.
Which finally answered that question, by the way. That was a lingering question from season 1.
Yeah.
Why did she turn?
Well, because not just why did she go back to the park and stuff, but there was that whole moment in which it was revealed to her that her whole drive to leave the park was programmed into her.
Right.
It wasn't something that she came to on her own will, which she had thought she had the whole time. And then it's like, okay, well, why? We thought this was about her, coming to her own free will, and the moment in which she does come to her own free will is when she decides to go for her daughter instead of leaving the park, going against kind of the directive that was put into her by Ford. And Ford had put that directive in there to protect her, but then by choosing to go against that, she kind of like proved to Ford that she was like had truly awoken at that point.
Mm-hmm. It was sort of like 3 paths. Like Ford had given he wanted to have Maeve outside, he wanted to have the Robot Rebellion in Westworld, and he wanted to have the Valley Beyond. So he had gone to great lengths to try to make sure that his children, as they were, would survive.
Right. Mm-hmm. Maeve is trying to find her daughter, who's with the Ghost Nation, and as they're entering the Valley Beyond, she's trying to find her daughter among the crowd. Meanwhile, Delos is coming up with their weaponized host, just causing every host in the vicinity to murder each other. As
notice that it didn't affect the people in Maeve's party,
right? Which is weird.
Which is because they'd fully awoken, and it's the same way that Maeve wasn't able to affect hosts that had been awoken.
Right. That's true. But what's weird, and I think you point this out to me too, was when we were talking about this the other day. So what you pointed out to me was it was a bit anticlimactic that Maeve wasn't able to do anything about Clementine. Like she wasn't able to like override it with her own because we saw like Maeve's ability to control other hosts was pretty powerful.
Mm-hmm. And then she was further upgraded by Ford.
And she was further upgraded by Ford.
We never saw what that meant.
And she just
didn't do anything beyond what she did.
And then she just folds here, right? So
yeah.
Well, she folds, but this is what she wanted to do. She's doing the only thing that she actually really cared about. She wanted to make sure her daughter got to safety.
That's true. She made sure her daughter got to safety. Her daughter gets to Great Beyond, and I guess Maeve can die knowing that she at least saved her daughter.
I don't think for a second that's the last we see of Maeve.
Oh, we're not gonna. Oh yeah, she's gonna be dead.
Oh yeah, definitely. we saw the end where Dolores has the spheres which contain
we don't know how many.
The consciousness is a very host, but there's nothing to say.
There's 5. Yeah, was there 5?
There's nothing to say one of them isn't Maeve. And actually, I saw an interview with Jonathan Nolan where he doesn't even know what hosts those are.
Yeah, well, that's the way it should be. I mean, why do they leave themselves room to adapt? But yeah, my problem with this isn't that she's it goes against her character doing what she does. My problem is that they put in all this effort to show how powerful Maeve was. Then they gave Clementine power based on Maeve's power. Then Maeve got a power up beyond that and full admin access from Ford. And then that kind of meant nothing. Like that additional level of power meant nothing. She couldn't do anything against against what Clementine was doing. Like, she couldn't stop any of what was going on with that, which just kind of, it felt like a waste. It felt like if you were trying to push up Maeve as having all this power and you don't have her being able to shut down Clementine, then kind of like, what's the point, at that? Like, you should have, like, taken away that MacGuffin in some other way. Like, Ford was able to bring Maeve back, but he didn't have time to do so with all of her code. So she's just a regular awoken host now, so she can't do anything. Then it makes sense. Like, she knows she's weak. She knows she's at risk, and she still ends up helping her daughter through. All of that would make sense, but that's not what we were presented with. That's kind of, I think, my problem with this episode. Like, that's how it's encapsulated. I like the idea of what they did. I like the conclusion of Maeve's story, of her seeing the moment with her daughter and the daughter's new mother, and just realizing that she needs to let them go. I like all of that. I like the way that plays out. I like the emotion of the scene. I like the way the actress portrayed it. I like all of that. What I don't like is that it gave this like idea of what Maeve could do, and then it just kind of threw it out without anything. Like it didn't make sense on like a logical perspective.
Well, the one thing they did give her is she puts out her hand and she makes everybody freeze. Even the mad hosts. They're done. They can't move. She's frozen them. Then she gets shot. So it's like we get like 2 seconds of Maeve actually demonstrating power, and then she's shot and dead. So yeah, that's a lot of build-up for Maeve being a badass, and you get just a brief moment of her doing that. That's all you get.
Yeah, that's just what I didn't like. I think that we talked about it before. This season has had 4 main characters. It had Dolores, Bernard, Maeve, and William.
And William, yeah.
These are like our 4 main characters, and they all kind of represented different paths. And I felt like they kind of folded everything into Dolores in the finale. And that's kind of where I felt like had a little, problematic. There's a lot of things where it's like I could say like, oh, like they kind of wasted William in this one moment, and it's like, oh yeah, but at the end they had all this stuff. It's like, yeah, but in the present he was just like useless, just like sitting around.
This was the one episode where you could tell, this was obviously shot out of sequence. William goes from being, I'm digging into my arm, wondering if I'm a robot, I'm half suicidal, to just be like, all right, I'll ride along with you. And there's even a post, I mean, Rachel Wood had this on like Instagram, where she posted a picture. It was her and Ed Harris. And the day they were shooting that, Ed Harris looked back around to the crew because he didn't know why. He said, why the fuck am I riding with Dolores?
Right.
So you can tell they shot that way out of sequence. And that's why it doesn't have the same sort of resonance after episode 9. They were shot completely differently.
I mean, it was a cool idea to have Dolores be the one to discover him when he's digging around in his arm. Yeah. Right. That's a cool idea. And just like for a microsecond, that was a cool moment. And then it just like was like, oh yeah, okay, I'm going to ride along with you now.
Well, Dolores picks up William because she lost Teddy. She lost her strong man. She doesn't have anybody. She doesn't have anybody to protect her, to be her gun, so to speak. And so she kind of picks William up to take.
I understand her
to take Teddy's place.
Right. But yeah, so that's. I mean, like I said, this is kind of my issue with this episode as a whole. Is there's a lot of things that were set up for certain characters, and it just felt like they said, "Okay, we're coming to a head. Let's throw this out. Let's throw that out. Let's throw that out, and let's focus in on just this part." And that's kind of where I take issue. Like, I like the ideas, I just don't like how they brought them out. Like, I don't like that they threw out so much of what was going, and I think that it hindered other characters' character stories in doing so. Yeah. So that's kind of been my issue with it. But that aside, I did really like the way they represented the Valley Beyond, with the people going through the gate and falling off the side, and it's like they're splitting into one half going in there, one half not. I like that they showed Dolores putting Teddy. She had dug out his brain and put him into the Valley Beyond as well.
The payoff with Akecheta was nice too. That Akecheta escort Maeve's kid basically into the Valley Beyond and gets shot on the way, but gets to the other side and he's okay. Great payoff right there, I thought.
Yeah. It's all of that is really good. I liked all of the way that works. I wasn't expecting them to kind of do it that way, that they were just going to send him into a virtual world, but it makes sense and it works. At this point, around when this was happening, after Bernard had opened that up, there just seemed to be a lot of confusion with Bernard and Dolores, talking about like Dolores was deleting basically all of the data about the guest once she was done. She was like, oh, let's delete this. And then she was like, oh yeah, and let's close this Valley Beyond too. Like, screw the Valley Beyond. Even though she put like Teddy, it's just weird. Like, it was confusing, that moment between those two characters and the kind of conflict they have. Like, you understand the fundamental conflict between the two of them, but kind of like the direct conflict in that moment didn't necessarily make sense to me.
Well, didn't she not put Teddy into the Valley Beyond until we find out later that she's basically been put into a different body? Then she puts Teddy in after she changes her mind?
Did she? Yeah, maybe she did.
I don't know.
But even still, like there was just a lot there that just didn't make sense for me. With like Dolores taking such a hard line against the Valley Beyond, it's like, yeah, you might think that's another cage, but let hosts choose for themselves. Like, you're not their, you know.
Yeah, exactly. I really thought like Dolores taking a hard line was just really like because they needed season 3 to happen. Like if Dolores said, "Oh, that's wonderful, let's all go there," then there would be no season 3 would take place in the Valley Beyond.
Well, there's also a slight character payoff for it, though, because of what happens. So Dolores is taking this hard line stance, and she doesn't think that's good enough. She doesn't think that the host should have to go to some artificial land. She wants to go into the real world.
Right.
Bernard pulls the big change on her and shoots her dead.
Yeah.
Because says, no, you can't do that.
Because she's threatening to, straight up murder people, you know?
Yeah,
and, like,
all of these lives for no reason, and that's the character payoff. She comes back around, Bernard brings her back, and she realizes she was wrong to do that.
And she's more mellow now, right? Now that she's Charlotte.
She's only going to murder people, not hosts.
Yeah.
Except she murders Bernard.
True.
She does it for the right reason because she knows that that's the only way she can get him across.
She brings him back, so it's fine.
Yeah. She kills his body to get him across so she could leave.
This brings us almost to the present of the whole season. So Bernard and Dolores go into the Valley Beyond. Bernard shoots Dolores, washes up on a beach somewhere or whatever, and is found by Elsie, right? And then we go back in and we find out all this.
There's another part we're missing here, which is before he washed up on the beach, he went back with Charlotte and Elsie.
Yeah, he went back
that's
and Elsie.
And this is before he washed up on the beach.
That's right. Yeah.
This is what changes Bernard's mind. Makes him regret having killed Dolores.
Bernard's mind, right? Yeah, because what changes his mind, right? Because he bears witness to Charlotte murdering Elsie. Charlotte just straight up kills her.
And he can't do anything about it because Elsie had told him to freeze all motor functions.
Yeah, because Elsie told him to freeze all motor functions. And then he has a vision of Ford, and basically Ford tells him what to do. Ford tells him to bring Dolores back, but bring her back in a clone of Charlotte, right? Bring her back in the form of Charlotte, and then Charlotte Dolores kills the real Charlotte. Yeah, Charlotte kills the real Charlotte. Then we find out that wasn't really Ford talking to Bernard. That was Bernard, manifested a version of Ford. Because remember, Bernard deleted Ford.
Yeah.
Ford is actually gone.
So that wasn't Ford's logic going through Bernard. That was Bernard, guessing Ford's logic and giving it, personality.
Yeah, well, that was Ford. That's Bernard basically passing the buck, right? They say, I didn't do that. Ford did that. Hey,
well, it dovetails a little bit with the first season, because we see those scenes in the where Dolores is talking, and she thinks she's talking to somebody else in that room, and it turns out to be listening to herself. And Bernard has basically manifested something else, but it's really his own voice. And only up until this moment, Bernard had been sort of quasi-awake. Now he's awake. It took to that moment.
Yeah,
he's a full
moment.
And so after Elsie was killed by Dolores, after he brought Dolores back in Charlotte's body, had Charlotte killed, kind of set the plan back into motion, and then scrambled his own brain because he knew that he needed to not be able to access. He knew that he was going to be exposed, and that he couldn't give all the information to them at once. And the only way to stop that was to not have that information.
And by the time they have Bernard cornered, it's too late because Charlotte wasn't really Charlotte. And surprise, Dolores turns around and she kills all the Delos people.
Mm-hmm. and then kills Bernard. And then
kills Bernard and smuggles him out of Westworld, right?
And then uses the Delos was about to send off. Go on.
They do upload Teddy. She does, I think in that moment, before she shoots Bernard, uploads Teddy, and we get that last heartbreaking image of poor James Marston, little puppy dog, all alone in the Valley Beyond.
which I guess means we won't be seeing James Marsden again next season, or I guess that doesn't mean anything.
The whole season's in the Valley Beyond.
We'll find out, but the EW, Entertainment Weekly interview with the showrunner said that's pretty much gone. That's severed. So we may never see Teddy again.
I mean,
Yeah,
I'd be fine with that.
We made like an intentional point, which was that Delos was going to transmit. They set up all the satellite equipment. This is like the only way that Dolores was able to fully realize her plan for the Valley Beyond. Now that she's calmed down a bit and put Teddy in there, the only way she was able to realize that was to have Delos come in with their satellite gear. And they set up their satellite gear in order to transmit the guest data to Delos in a safe location in Delos. And using that equipment, Dolores was able to send it elsewhere, seemingly nowhere. So it's just like a laser signal fading away in space or something, I guess. I don't know. Maybe it's just some other location.
So who knows where that is?
Yeah. So she's sent off to, I don't know, maybe she distributed it across the internet. Who knows? She did something. She sent off the Valley Beyond and everybody in it somewhere.
Not just a Reddit.
Which is something she couldn't have done if Delos hadn't brought all that satellite history. But she was able to do that now. Like we said, a few times now, she killed Bernard. She went with all the Delos people are finally leaving because it's all considered resolved now. So they're finally letting the surviving guest off. And Charlotte's going to leave. She gets kind of halted for a second by Stubbs, who kind of makes it known that, like, he seems to know what's going on. He seems to know that she's not Charlotte. And he mentions that he was hired by Ford himself and that he had his own kind of directives towards what he was supposed to be doing that go beyond what his actual position said he was supposed to be doing.
So he might be a host himself.
Yeah, they made some kind of hints towards the fact that he himself could be a host. But I think that the main idea is that, like, he's been a plant this whole time. Like, he's been helping with Ford's mission by guarding certain aspects or running certain aspects this entire time.
Yep.
And so he kind of makes that known to Dolores, who's kind of a little bit taken back by it. But then she gets on, in Charlotte's Why, she gets on, she takes, all the brains, they go back to Hong Kong to, the house that Arnold had been building for his family so long ago.
Yes.
And Ford had owned the property and had been using it, set up basically all the tools that Dolores would need to, like, build hosts, to do everything there. And in there, we see her back in her old body, dressed in a dress. It's like, I think it's the same dress we saw her in when she was, like, at the party for like William or something, that same black dress. Mm-hmm. So it's the idea that she's no longer playing Cowboys and Indians anymore, she had said. She's kind of out. She has somebody with her, presumably another host, and she brings back Bernard and does so with the ending message that in order for their kind to kind of survive, they kind of need to be at odds with each other, but they kind of both need to be there.
Right. They both need to be there, but they need to be at odds. She says they can't be friends, they can't be allies.
Mm-hmm.
So she tells Bernard he has to be against her, but that's the way that it needs to be. They both
well, she's already
to be. I don't know.
Well, she needs him because she's seen, what a valuable ally he is.
But she's telling him that she doesn't need him to be an ally. She needs him to be the opposite.
Right. It's sort of she sees the potential. She sees that he could also lead the hosts to a different sort of freedom. It's an Xavier and Magneto thing they're going to have going on.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It's basically that the idea is that their chances are slim, so it's divide and conquer.
Yeah.
And taking different approaches. So, that's pretty much it. That takes us into the final credits.
Yes,
except that we had a post-credit sequence.
Yeah, we did.
Which I like immediately after watching it.
They do a fake out
on the boards, and I posted to Will. I said, make sure you guys watch that there's the post-credit scene.
Well, we saw earlier. We saw William enter the elevator right to the forge, but we never see him come out of it. And when the credits roll, we never find out what happens because you're kind of left with, wait, what about William? They just kind of left him in that elevator, and then when we get to the sequence, he comes out of the elevator, and we sort of get a repeat of what was happening earlier with James Delos. I forgot
he's in the thing.
Yeah, he's in the thing, right? Fidelity. Like, his daughter comes out, and she says, a host of his daughter, right? I mean, you assume it's a host, at least. And she says she's testing for fidelity. And it's like, what? What's going on? It kind of ends right there, right?
The interesting points that are brought up in their conversation as it goes to the end there is that she says that this has been a test that's been going on for a long time. And that he is supposedly the final conclusion of what Delos had been trying to do this whole time.
Yeah,
Delos has finally done it. They finally found the way.
According to Jonathan Nolan, this is like 1,000 or something years in the future.
Yeah, this is in the far future. She also hints that they said I mean, in the park, and she's like, what's left of it?
Yeah, what's left of the park.
And I think she said the same thing about mankind. Like, there's something about like the world outside or men or something, and like what's
we don't know. It's all vague. It's so far in the future, and the hints are so vague.
Yeah, but we do get from host William, we get the big character payoff of he's just this whole time he wants to, because he knows what they've been doing in the Forge, and because he knows that people are code and they can't really make decisions and that they're passengers. All he's been doing this whole time in this game is he's been trying to find a way to make choices for himself that no one can tell him what to do.
Right, exactly.
And that big payoff for William
big payoff is now he can't make choices for himself, right?
Well, yeah, it could be that this is either like who knows, maybe it was a break glass just in case, we'll bring the Man in Black back because he's the only person in the far future that can stop Dolores, who's now ruling the world. Or it could just be a torture scenario where Dolores has had William, be created and go insane and destroyed and created and gone insane and destroyed over and over again.
Right, exactly.
Or that he's an experiment at making mankind into hosts, not just in their bodies, but in their ability to change. And that the conclusion to Delos' experiment to bring people back that had always failed because they always ran into the same point over and over again. Maybe they were able to finally break the loop.
Yep.
So there's lots of different kind of ways you can read into it. I know that Jonathan Nolan and Lisa Joy have said that this is not only is this far future, but this is what they're driving towards seasons down the line. So this isn't like season 3 will get us here. This is like by the end of the show we get here kind of moment.
Like season 5.
They also said that the majority of season 3 would not take place in the park.
Well, yeah, I think that's obvious.
Well, it's obvious from the perspective of where it should go. It's not obvious from the perspective of where a TV show would necessarily go.
Yeah, but we already saw Dolores and Bernard leave the park. They're like our two central characters at this point. So if our central characters are outside the park, I think we can assume that that's where the action is going to take place.
I think they're going to leave the park, and then they're going to start. They're going to write a Western movie, and season 3 is going to be them still dressed up like cowboys and Indians, filming a Western movie.
I think it's time. I think that's exciting. I think it's time to leave the park behind. I think it's time to leave the Western motive behind and kind of go somewhere different. I mean, the show will still be called Westworld, which will be weird with no Westworld, but.
Well, we could still sort of get parts of some things in the park where it's, they're bringing
in the past, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, we could see that. We can maybe see Maeve be brought back online, or maybe Clementine. She seems a pretty major character to leave behind.
Yeah, I don't think Maeve's gone for good.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I think Teddy's gone forever, but not Maeve.
Yeah. Well, we're at the question here with the pearls. Who are the 5 pearls? Dolores is one of them herself, and she's printed herself into another body, like we see at the end, so that there's 2 Doloreses.
And you could speculate. Nobody knows, not even the show writers, until they write the episodes. So you just speculate. It could be anybody. One of them could be Ford,
Anthony Hopkins is getting up there.
Yeah, he is.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it. So we're left. I mean, it's interesting because season 1 left us with a very clear path of what was going to happen in season 2. Season 2 was the robot uprising, basically. Season 1 left it very clear what was happening. Season 2 leaves only vague hints as to what season 3 could be, right? And all the major plot lines, like all the questions you had from season 1 and season 2 are answered. What is Westworld? What's the goal of Westworld? What's the goal of the people running it? What drove the Man in Black? What's his backstory? Yada, yada, yada. All those questions have been answered to a satisfactory degree. And what we're now left at the end with the show kind of posing some new questions and also like a new direction. But it's really like if there was no season 3, I would be fine. This feels like a complete series right here. Season 3 is Future World.
Yeah, season 3. Season 3 is Future World. Season 3 would be probably where they start to pose new questions, right? So you get, it seems to be season 3 is almost like a reboot where you're going to have a new setup, you're going to have new questions posed, new everything. Even Dolores and Bernard's roles in the story are going to be completely different. So it's almost going to be like a new series.
It's funny because they filmed most of the series out where I live.
Right.
Like, there's a motion picture park that was set up by Gene Autry, called Melody Park or Melody Ranch. And that's where they filmed like Deadwood, and it's where they film a lot of Westworld. They film it also in Utah and in other areas in California, but like Sweetwater, the main town town in Westworld is that's Melody Ranch. It's the exact same set they used in Deadwood, if you've seen that. So I'm wondering, just because I have that personal connection with the show filming near me, I'm wondering, like, where are they gonna film this? Like, what's this gonna look like set wise, you know? Because we had, as big and vast as Westworld was, as many options as they had with stuff going on. They did have, you had the Mesa as a set location, a giant set location, then you had Sweetwater, you had these kind of sets in these areas. It doesn't seem like there's much reason to go back to any of them, really.
No, doesn't.
So that's going to be kind of an interesting point. Like, how is this going to be set up? It's like you said, it's almost like a reboot, possibly.
Yeah, like I said, it's almost like a new series.
Maybe they were forced to do that because that Deadwood movie is going into production. They're like, sorry, Melody Ranch is going to be taken off. And they're like, screw it. We're just going to let everybody go to the future.
I mean, this is just based off a book and a 2-hour movie. Like, there's not a lot of content they can mine from the source material, so they got to do something original eventually, and here we are.
I'm sad Alex isn't here, because the fact that they're going into what I'm jokingly calling Future World, because we're basically saying that the past, when Logan and Delos and everybody signed on to Westworld, which was what they said 50 years ago.
Yeah, because this is obviously like the future, right? This takes place. This is not
the present in Westworld. Is like
this is not 2018. Yeah.
So technically, just going to the outside world is Future World.
Yeah, technically, you're right. In a sense.
So I know, like, I'm a little sad that Alex isn't on with us this week. He wasn't able to be on this week's podcast, but I'm a little sad he wasn't, because I know how much he's been wanting it to go in kind of a William Gibson direction, you know?
Maybe it'll be like a cyberpunk future outside of the Westworld, right? It'll be all cyberpunk. That'd be cool.
Or maybe it won't, but the 1,000 years in the future will be. You know?
Maybe, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it. Any final thoughts on the episode?
Let me pose this final thoughts on the season as a whole. I thought the season wrapped things up satisfactorily. It had some amazing moments, some amazing episodes, but it was bogged down too much by the time jumping, being confusing, and just trying to be mysterious and to set up. I thought at times it was just a bit too confusing and a bit too lofty in its ideals.
Or the horse a bit.
Yeah. So overall, I found it to be weaker than season 1. It wasn't as tightly plotted, I feel like.
I kind of agree with that, although I'd say that I think season 2 has higher highs than season 1 did.
It definitely does. There was nothing, there was nothing in, season 1 that compares to like Samurai World, right?
Or like Akecheta's like story with that.
Right.
Yeah.
So I said, the highs in the season are really high, but then it's bogged down with so much other confusing stuff, and that it's really a mixed bag at the end of the day.
Mike?
I guess I'm sort of in that same boat. If you look from, 30,000 feet up and you're looking down at the plot, it's, okay, robots wake up and try to leave Park, and it took us 20 hours to get there. You could go watch Ex Machina and get that same story done in an hour and a half.
Yeah.
I thought that was a pretty good movie. This goes to pains to get to the same place as that movie does over a much longer period of time. Now, you do get much more interesting characters. You get a lot more depth to them.
Yeah.
The world is, I'd rather, watch this and be a part of it, because it's a little cultural moment we're all having, where it's, the water cooler show is this.
Right.
I agree, though, that the first season was way stronger than this. Season 2, plot wise, it just didn't work as well by having 2 parallel timelines working about 2 weeks apart. I liked Samurai Worlds or East World, or whatever we're calling it, Shogun World.
Shogun World, that's the real name, yes.
I liked it, but it didn't need to be there in this season. It was almost throwaway. It
was almost like it was almost there exclusively for fan service. Like, they could have cut those episodes and nothing would have.
A little standalone, basically.
Yeah, they could have cut those episodes and it wouldn't have really had affected the plot much.
Yeah, nothing of value would have been lost necessarily with those, even though there was some good acting in it. And
even though there was some good acting, and it was like awesome, and it was cool to see it, and but yeah, it was kind of like, it wasn't germane to like the main plot of the season or anything happening around it. So
yeah. I think you could have taken some of the stuff that happened in the last episode, which was an hour and 30 minutes long, and sprinkled it in other episodes within the season and made everything a lot stronger.
I think when we were talking about the Shogun World episodes, Tyson was complaining about the Dolores and Teddy plot, but that was more relevant to the season than anything happening in Shogun World.
Well, I don't think. Let me finalize by saying what I think they should have done with Shogun World, which is that I don't think they should have cut that material from the show, the Dolores Teddy stuff. I think they should have rearranged the episodes.
Right, that's what you were arguing.
Westworld was self-contained.
Right.
I agree with that.
Yeah. I think I would agree.
And
So
then,
that's where
and then after that, they could do that, put the rest, all the Teddy Dolores stuff we needed for the main plot.
Yeah. So season 2, because of that sort of, those problems with pacing and, telling the stories in a coherent manner, suffered more than season 1. Still very good, but not as good as season 1. I can't wait to see season 3, though. I think it's going to be, like you guys were saying, new start for the show.
Right. I think
really interesting, and I hope they don't get too, overzealous with, needing to have 2 different time periods.
I
think that's the problem this season.
I think they need to drop that at this point.
Yeah.
I agree.
They could drop the time jumping. I'm afraid we'll probably take more trips to the year 3000 or wherever the hell Robot William is. 1,000 years in the future, we might start jumping more to that time period. But what I'm excited is season 3 is I have no idea what to expect at this point.
Yeah.
Like Tyson said, at the end of season 1, we knew what to expect. We said, well, the robots are awake now and they're killing people, so we're full on Westworld in season 2.
Yeah.
In season 3, question mark. Dolores is going to start a revolution. That's about all we know.
Yeah. And we don't fully know what that revolution means yet.
We don't even know what the outside world is even like at this point.
We don't even know.
We've been trapped in Westworld this whole time.
We don't even know, character-wise. Okay, the Man in Black last we saw, William, he was on the beach holding his hand, and he was apparently near bleeding out, so what role he plays. We don't even know if Bernard is a Pearl that she took with her, or if she reconstructed Bernard again from her own memory, she tried to do before with Arnold.
Like I said, this is almost a reboot, because we don't even, the characters aren't even the same characters, technically. Even Dolores has gone through a huge change.
Yeah, and there's those bits she was talking about where she was saying, hey, maybe it's better to leave flaws in, when she was reconstructing Bernard, because we find out in those flashback scenes that all those times that Bernard was talking to Dolores, that she was actually using that as a fidelity test for him.
Yes.
To bring him back. So she could have changed him a little bit. We don't know. It's going to be, like you said, a completely new ball game, different field of play, and I can't wait to see what they do with it. It's going to be great.
Yeah, it's definitely.
However long that takes, probably another 2 years.
Yeah, season guys in 2021.
Yes, exactly.
All right, so that's it for our discussion this week. Last thing on the podcast, we're going to talk about what's coming up in the week ahead. So we're recording this a little bit late, recording it on Saturday. So yesterday, on Friday, June 29th, was a big day for Netflix with international shows. But before that, Amazon had A Very English Scandal came out. And then Netflix, like I said, they dropped 5 shows all yesterday. They dropped A La Forêt, Nikita Salas, Churchill's Secret Agents, The New Recruits. They dropped a show called Kiss Me First. Have either of you seen Skins?
No.
Nope, not I.
Okay, so this is the creator of Skins. It's like a VR kind of story thing. So I'm interested in checking that out just because I liked Skins. And then Glow, they dropped on Netflix as well. Will and I are going to discuss that in 2 weeks, I believe.
Yeah, because we're discussing Luke Cage next week.
That's right.
I need to catch up on.
Yes.
Then on Sunday, July 1st, 2018, Power comes back to stars, The Tunnel of Vengeance on PBS, and Mostly for Millennials, a new show on Adult Swim. On Monday, July 2nd, 2018, In the Cut comes to Bounce. I have no idea what that is. And then on Friday, July 6th.
I don't know what Bounce is.
Yeah, I have never heard of that channel before, but Friday, July 16th, or July 6th, 2018, Netflix has another 4 shows coming back. Sacred Games, Free Reign, Samantha with an exclamation point at the end, and Anne with an E for its 2nd season. That's their remake of, or retelling of Anne of Green Gables.
Okay.
So that's what's coming up in the next week. Next week on the podcast, as Will said, we're going to be talking about Luke Cage Season 2, and we're going to go into kind of detail about that. Hopefully Will be through the whole season. If not, he should be pretty close to the end. So we'll kind of give our idea of what we think of the season. You can reach me on Twitter. I am at Tyson Gifford. You can reach Will. He is at Voxel Hero. Mike, you still don't have a Twitter?
Nope.
You can check out our Facebook page and our YouTube channel, as well as our site, thetotalscreen.com. You can subscribe to this podcast through any major podcast client like iTunes or Pocket Cast. And the entire backlog of our podcast is available on our YouTube channel. So thank you everybody for listening. Good night.
Good night.
Adios.
If you would like to reach out to us and make a comment, send an email to contact@thetotalscreen.com. Stay tuned to The Total Screen for the very best.